You've probably heard it 1,000 times. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. But what if I told you this famous phrase holds a hidden puzzle, a surprisingly complex history that spans across centuries and even different scriptures?
Yeah, you know the one. It's the ultimate image of impossibility, right? I mean, it's such an absurd, memorable metaphor, and it is echoed through the ages. But where does it really come from? Well, the answer is way more interesting than you might think.
And this is where the puzzle truly begins. This isn't just one story, it's a tale of two scriptures. The same vivid image pops up in both the Christian Gospels and the Islamic Quran, but, and this is the interesting part, it's used to teach two very different lessons. Okay, so first, let's jump into the context that's probably most familiar to a lot of us. We're going to start with the Bible, where this whole phrase is part of a really dramatic moment about what it truly costs to be a follower. So you can find this in 3 of the 4 Gospels. The setup is this. A rich young man comes up to Jesus and asks how to get eternal life. The answer sounds simple, but it's a huge ask. Sell everything you own and follow me. But the man just can't do it. His great wealth is just too much to let go of. So the key thing to get here is that the subject is specifically the wealthy. This would have been a huge shock to the disciples, because back then, wealth was often seen as a sign of God's blessing. But Jesus flips that idea on its head. He's saying that from a human standpoint, it's impossible for the rich to get into heaven on their own. The story does end on a hopeful note, though. What's impossible for people is totally possible for God.
All right, now let's switch gears and head over to the Quran. We're going to see how this exact same powerful image gets used to teach a completely different spiritual lesson. Here, in the 7th chapter, or surah of the Quran, the metaphor shows up in a verse about the Day of Judgment. The whole context here isn't about money or possessions at all. It's all about a person's spiritual attitude.
So, in the Quran's version, the subjects are the arrogant, the people who proudly reject God's signs. For them, that camel trying to pass through the needle's eye, well, it symbolizes the absolute, final, no-turning-back nature of their fate. The gates of heaven are slammed shut. The focus isn't on grace for the rich, but on total moral accountability for spiritual pride.
Okay, so we've got one image with 2 really distinct meanings. But that brings up another question. Were we ever supposed to take this image of a camel literally? People have been debating this for centuries, and there are some pretty fascinating theories out there.
Probably the most popular theory, and one you might have heard, is the small gate idea. The story goes that in Jerusalem's walls, there was this little pedestrian gate nicknamed the Eye of the Needle. And a camel could only get through if you took off all its cargo and it got down on its knees and crawled. It's a pretty powerful metaphor for humility, right? It's a great story, but there's a tiny problem. There is 0 historical or archaeological evidence that a gate with that name ever existed back then. Most scholars today are pretty sure this explanation was just invented way later on to kind of soften the blow of the original saying. Okay, theory number 2 is all about language. It suggests there might have been a mistranslation from the original Greek. See, the Greek word for camel is kamelos, but there's another almost identical word, kamelos, spelled just slightly differently, that means a thick rope or a ship's cable. A rope through a needle's eye? That sounds a little more possible, but it definitely loses the shocking punch of the original. And that brings us to the 3rd theory, and the one that most scholars land on today. It was never meant to be taken literally at all. It was just a common, ancient figure of speech. Hyperbole. A deliberate, extreme exaggeration designed to create an image of something absolutely 100% impossible. And we've got some pretty strong evidence for this. Turns out, very similar sayings were floating around the region. For instance, the Babylonian Talmud, another ancient text, uses the phrase an elephant passing through the eye of a needle to talk about something that's just totally imaginary or impossible. So this shows it was a recognizable kind of stock phrase in that culture. So after digging into all those theories, let's bring it all back home. Let's put these 2 interpretations right next to each other to really see just how differently this one powerful image was put to work.
So let's just lay it out. In the Bible, the subject is the wealthy. The meaning, that human effort alone isn't enough, and the focus is ultimately on divine grace and hope. Now, in the Quran, the subject is the arrogant. The meaning is that judgment is final and absolute, and the focus is all about personal, moral accountability.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's that this single, unforgettable image, which is probably just an ancient piece of hyperbole,
was picked up and powerfully adapted by two of the world's major religions to teach two profound, yet really distinct lessons about what truly blocks our path to the divine.
And that really leaves you with a final thought. This was the story of just one phrase. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other sayings that we use every day without even thinking about it are carrying their own ancient debates, surprising connections, and complex histories just waiting to be unpacked?